Your Honor, as this case has been tried and would continue to be tried until the state completed its case in chief, the evidence has shown that the defendant, throughout the time between 2013 to 2022, conspired with both indicted and unindicted co-conspirators to participate in the enterprise known as Young Slime Life, or YSL, through a pattern of racketeering activity. Throughout that time, multiple conspirators, both indicted and unindicted, and including the defendant, have committed overt acts intended to further the enterprise itself. With regard to the defendant, as far back, the evidence has shown, as 2013, the defendant, along with other YSL founding members, Walter Murphy, for one, committed an aggravated assault and armed robbery against a Derek Dotson. The court has heard evidence of that presented through Adriane Bean, who was a co-conspirator in that particular act. The armed robbery of an Archillian Bennett back in 2013. As alleged in the indictment, defendant and unindicted and indicted co-conspirators committed acts to further YSL that included drug sales, aggravated assault, and murder. They used and furthered, rather, this conspiracy by using social media posts and music to assert the violent nature of and the dominance of Young Slime Life, which is also known as YSL. The defendant is charged with being a leader of the gang YSL, and evidence has been presented by accomplices and co-founders of YSL, Trontavia Stevens and Walter Murphy, and evidence would have been presented, in the words of the defendant himself, that the defendant, as shown by some of his own social media postings, was the founder, one of the founders of YSL, along with Mr. Stevens and Mr. Murphy. YSL formed, according to the evidence that has come out in this trial, in 2012, 2013, under the former version of the name of the gang called Rock Crew, or Raised on Cleveland. The court has heard evidence of the 2014 and 2015 incidents that have involved conflicts between YSL members and IF gang members, that included someone shooting the window of Mr. Williams' car, and armed individuals rushing outside during shootings at Club Crucial to ensure Mr. Williams' safety, shootings at a place called the Dugout, where armed individuals rushed to ensure Mr. Williams' safety, shootings at Mr. Kelvin Watts committed by members of YSL, communication with members of YSL after those incidents, and ultimately the murder of Donovan Thomas at the hands of members of YSL. The evidence has shown and will show that on January 10th of 2015, members of YSL drove a car rented by the defendant, a gray Infiniti, and drove past Mr. Thomas as he stood outside of a barber shop congregating with friends, and unloaded an array of bullets on Mr. Thomas, hitting him, his Chevrolet Tahoe, and two other persons in the process. Mr. Thomas died from those bullets. Phone records show that communication was held between Mr. Williams, Mr. Kelvin Treadwell, Mr. Demise McMullen, corroborating accomplice testimony that has been presented in this courtroom regarding what happened, who committed the murder, and what happened to the guns and the vehicles that were used in the murder. After the murder of Donovan Thomas Jr., the members of YSL responsible for the murder and members of YSL who were not responsible for the murder congregated at Mr. Williams' condominium called the Sky House, and they all made plans and later either drove or flew down to Miami. Prior factual acknowledgments by members of YSL include that Mr. Williams gave each of the persons who accompanied him to Miami money to lay low as they left the city following the murder of Mr. Thomas. The evidence has shown the ensuing conflict that occurred after Mr. Thomas was killed. It has shown shootings at Mr. Rashawn Bennett's home, shootings at Mr. Darren Mills' mother's home, and I said Mr. Rashawn Bennett's mother's home. Shootings unrelated to the conflict with members of If Gang, of a Lil Wayne tour bus. That shooting followed the confronting by Atlanta Police Department of members of YSL that drove to the compound where Lil Wayne was making an appearance and who drove there with the intent to disrupt and cause harm and to shoot up Lil Wayne's tour bus. Lil Wayne was another artist with whom Mr. Williams was having conflict according to the testimony that had been presented. Mr. Williams had come out at that time with a mixtape that carried the name of an album that Mr. Carter was set to release and was not able to because his label would not allow that to happen. That caused a contractual or the threat of a lawsuit. It caused Mr. Williams angst. He posted about it. He said derogatory things about the persons who were threatening him with the lawsuit. And as a result, he had to rename his mixtape to something different than what he initially intended. The person who ultimately was convicted of shooting that tour bus up, Jimmy Winfrey, is a person that I believe that recordings have come in regarding jail phone calls, rather, from Mr. Winfrey and members of YSL regarding communication about getting a lawyer. Following the shootings that occurred in 2015, music, social media postings, and other overt acts were committed by Mr. Williams and other members of YSL, taunting members of groups that they considered opposition to YSL, posting of threats of violence by members of YSL against those people. Specifically, the music, Your Honor, contained lyrics such as the following: I rep my life for real, for slimes, you know I kill. I shoot at your mammy, need to stand down. I up my stamina, take it to trial, get an appeal, take it to trial, pay for that casket, that's just if we whack 'em. YSL slimy and shady. Watch me whack that bitch, pop him like assist. Glock with the assist. It also consisted of a song wherein Mr. Williams sang or rapped the lyrics, hey, this is that slime shit, that YSL shit, killing 12 shit, fuck a jail shit. I'm in the VIP, I got the pistol on my hip, fuck the police. You praying that you live, I'm praying that I hit, this that slime shit. 100 rounds in a Tahoe, I'm prepared to take them down. Got banana clips for all these ends acting monkey. This is that slime shit, this is that mob shit. Fuck the judge, YSL, this that mob life. Defendant Williams released a video on YouTube of a song wherein he states, I shot at his mommy, now he no longer mentions me. Act like you want war and they gonna smoke you like a blunt. Another song, I escaped every one of the licks because I was supposed to be rich. I don't care nothing about a cop. I'm just telling you how it is. I done did the robbing, I done did the jacking, now I'm full rapping. Gave the lawyer close to $2 million, he handles all the killing. We don't speak about shit on wax, it's all my business. We know to kill the biggest cats of all kittens. In another song, I was on Cleveland, stuck like a magnet, bitch ass N-word, pay for that casket, that's just if we whack 'em. In yet another song, Defendant Williams raps, red just like Elmo, but I never fucking giggle, YSL won't fold. Pick his ass off from the balcony, wipe an end's nose. I'm gonna F for the cash, then she getting robbed by Tick, a reference to Trontavia Stevens. All I ever wanted was the money, put your hands in the air if you dare. F and N, put him in a wheelchair. And even later on, Mr. Williams, and I believe that this was in 2019, made a post to YFN Lucci or Rayshawn Bennett. If I ain't like what you do for your mother and kids, I would have been killed you. And in yet another song entitled Anybody, Defendant Williams stated, I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body. I got the streets on my back, carry it like I'm moving a body. I told them to shoot 100 rounds like he trying to movie the body. Ready for war like I'm Russia. I get all types of cash, I'm a general. As Mr. Williams' prominence in the music industry rose, his ascension within or in leadership in the gang YSL became more apparent as he rapped and talked about the crimes that YSL co-conspirators and members committed and how he got away with robberies. With respect to the Donovan Thomas murder, the court has heard evidence through phone records that within 6 minutes of the shooting of Donovan Thomas Jr., a phone call was made from Demise McMullen's cell phone to defendant Williams' phone. And then immediately after that call, Mr. Williams calls his sister Dora Greer and then calls Kelvin Treadwell. There's then a series of calls between Dora Greer and Treadwell, and then Treadwell calls Demise McMullen or Nard. All of those calls happen within 15 minutes of the 911 call. And as I have stated before, the court has heard accomplice prior inconsistent statements about who committed the murder itself and what happened afterwards. The conflict between YSL and members of IF Gang continued into 2019, wherein Mr. Williams raps the lyrics that I referred to earlier. In May 2019, a YSL member shot multiple times at a vehicle owned by Rayshawn Bennett, a black and red Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. At the time was being driven by a Milton Howard Jr. It was after that incident, later in August 2019, that defendant Williams posted on his page the language, YFN, if I ain't like what you do for your mother and kids, I would have been killed you. The post was then deleted from his account. Through text messages of a co-conspirator, Marquavius Huey, there was communication between Mr. Huey and Mr. Williams, both in January and in September of 2020. On January 19th, 2020, Mr. Williams sent a flyer to Marquavius Huey with the performance location of Rayshawn Bennett, or YFN Lucci. And when he sent that, he sent it with the message, "Handle that tonight, SLAT, S-L-A-T-T. Mr. Huey responded, SLAT, S-L-A-T-T. On September 2nd, 2020, Mr. Huey sent a flyer to Mr. Williams with another performance location of YFN Lucci, and Mr. Williams responded, SLATty, that is S-L-A-T-T-Y, handle and stay very low. Mr. Huey responded, SLAT, and for show, F-A-S-H-O. I've been out the way and appreciate you for everything, my brother. Never about money with me. I'm built on loyalty. Mr. Williams responded, SLAT, handle that. I got you. Through text messages and on a separate occasion, Mr. Huey said and conveyed to Mr. Williams that he would sit down for any one of them. And I believe that to be a reference of going to jail. When Mr. Bennett was not killed in 2022, Jaden Myrick sought permission from defendant Williams to stab Mr. Bennett while Mr. Bennett resided with Mr. Myrick at the jail. Mr. Myrick reached out to co-indictee Khalif Adams, who reached out to co-indictee Demekion Garlington to get permission from Mr. Williams. Demekion Garlington was also involved in the back and forth shootings back in 2015. On February 9th, 2022, Rayshawn Bennett was stabbed by Jaden Myrick at the Fulton County Jail. And after that stabbing, Mr. Myrick reached out multiple times to Mr. Adams for some type of compensation for the stabbing. Mr. Adams reached out to Mr. Garlington about the payment for the completion. On February the 22nd, 2022, YSL co-conspirator and co-indictee Christian Eppinger called YSL co-conspirator Antonio Sumlin to get permission to finish what Mr. Myrick could not complete, that is the killing of Mr. Bennett. Mr. Eppinger asked for payment for a lawyer. However, these calls were intercepted and Mr. Bennett was relocated. In March 2022, information about the stabbing made the news, and shortly thereafter, a series of violent offenses occurred. On March 11, 2022, YSL associates Christian McMiller and Darius Ford were gunned down. Mr. McMiller is a childhood friend of Mr. Williams. Mr. Ford was also a friend of Mr. Williams. On March 12th, the day after, there was a shootout near the Cleveland Avenue area. A shooting by a YSL associate, Stephen Harris, in YFN territory occurred, and a YFN member was shot in the head. March 11th through March 14th, there were a number of social media posts going back and forth between members of YSL and YFN. One of them was a post by Shannon Stillwells. We ain't the only ones who ain't gonna be crying, that's going to be crying. After a posting was made by Mr. Watts picturing him, Mr. Shamel Drinks, and Mr. Jasper Walters, on March 14th, 2022, after YSL members spotted Mr. Drinks at a gas station, Mr. Drinks was gunned down as he drove away from the gas station and waited at a red light. Later, Mr. Stillwell, Mr. Nichols, Mr. Garlington, and Mr. Farley were all charged with the murder. That is one of the acts that we are still and would anticipate the court seeing the evidence of during the course of this trial. After grand jury warrants were issued after this indictment for Mr. Williams and 27 other co-conspirators, following searches of phones, wiretaps, and other information that led police to understand the role that Mr. Williams played in the YSL street gang and enterprise. Mr. Williams' home, he was arrested at his home and a search warrant was executed inside his home. While at his home, a sale amounts of illegal narcotics, including those that he is charged with in this indictment, was found. Also found was the machine gun with which the defendant has been charged in this indictment. The gun had a switch. The narcotics included marijuana, codeine, and cocaine, and inside the home were also other guns besides the guns with the switch. The items were seized, and again, Mr. Williams was subsequently arrested, along with other YSL members at Mr. Williams' home. Your Honor, that is the evidence that I believe has been shown throughout the course of this trial and that the state would continue to show. There are several messages between Mr. Huey and Mr. Williams inside the cell phone, that one of the cell phones that were recovered from Mr. Huey. Besides the messages about tells Mr. Williams he has a new number. Mr. Huey asks Mr. Williams, hey, my brother, I'm fucked up. You ain't got nobody I can pull up on and have something in my pocket. Mr. Williams responds, slat, let me call BEO. Mr. Huey responding, slat, I need you, my brother. Mr. Huey saying, asking whether or not a lawyer was going to go and talk to another YSL associate, asking Mr. Williams to send him some money to pay his lawyer off. Mr. Williams asking Mr. Huey, who had been accused of armed robbery, what did he want? Mr. Huey responded with a number. Mr. Williams responded, "Slat." After Mr. Williams stole a star ring from one of the victims in the indictment, he asked Mr. Williams, "Do you have a star ring?" Mr. Williams said, "Yes." Mr. Huey said, "Slat, you can't cash at me $500 so I can make a payment to my lawyer." Mr. Williams responded, "Slat." Mr. Huey sent him his phone number. Mr. Williams assured him through his responses, Slat, that he would take care of them. Throughout Mr. Huey's phone, you see messages of this nature between Mr. Huey and Mr. Williams. The court, again, will hear that as this trial continues. The recommendation that the state previously made prior to us reaching this point was made with the hope that Mr. Williams would agree to certain special conditions of probation that we asked him to adhere to, and that he would take ownership and responsibility for being the leader of YSL. Given that those negotiations have broken down, we are asking that the court sentence Mr. Williams as we have asked earlier. And prior to the court imposing a sentence, we would ask that Ms. Shawana Edmonds, who is the mother of Mr. Thomas, be allowed an opportunity to make an impact statement. And that is all that we have, unless the court has questions.
Okay, well, given that Mr. Williams is not charged with the murder of Mr. Thomas, I don't think that that is applicable here.
I checked on that, Your Honor, with respect to count one. As a co-conspirator, Mr. Williams is responsible for all of the acts of the other co-conspirators, the overt acts. The overt act of the murder of Donovan Thomas is one of those acts.
I know, and this trial is not complete, and so y'all have not yet proven that. Not to mention that you dismissed the murder charge against one of the co-defendants who already pled, so.
Not for that case, Your Honor. That was a different, that was Mr. Drinks.
Okay.
We have not dismissed any.
All right, well, if there is a conviction on the RICO or murder count following the close of this trial, that would be the appropriate time for the victim impact statement to be made.